Hello, my chess friends. This is Zachary Beckedahl, National Master and Poder chess instructor, coming at you with week 11 of our video series. We've worked through a lot of stuff so far, all through our chess strategies, and I thought it'd be important to sit down at an actual chessboard and just show some practical, kind of fun advice on things that you might not think about in the chess game that'll help you be a little more prepared for your tournament, be a little more prepared for your opponents, and kind of the practical side of chess. A lot of chess is practical, and it's not just moving your pieces around and how much did you learn about chess this week, this year. A lot of people go into the chess game and they do much better because they're better at this side of the game. So I want to talk about a few things. First thing I want to talk about is confidence. When you're playing an opponent, maybe it's in a tournament or somebody you know, confidence is very important, and you want to do things to ensue confidence so that, you know, even if you make a mistake, if you do it confidently, there's so much more of a chance that either one, your opponent's going to not think it was a mistake because you're confident about it, or two, that even your opponent thinking that you planned that move out, and that even though it was a mistake, even if they make the best move, that they think that you meant to do it, and so they're still thinking you made a good move, and that's part of the key, is getting in your opponent's head. If your opponent thinks they're beat, and they think they're going to lose, and they think they're playing a pro, there's a lot more chance they're going to lose. My students, I remember for a while, would always tell me that they liked the fact that I taught them quickly how to use a chess clock and how to use chess notation, because they would be writing down their moves and they'd bring their chess clock to a tournament, and their opponents would be afraid of them because they'd be like, who's this professional with the chess clock and the notation sheets writing their moves down? And they looked good. And so things like that can help whenever you're playing confidently. Same thing when you move your pieces. A lot of people will move their pieces. They'll go like this, and they'll go, oh, and then they'll pick up their piece, and then they'll go, oh, and then they'll move. And I mean, when you do that, your opponent thinks you made a mistake. They're looking to see if they can take advantage of it, and they're just waiting to crush it. Now, there is some strategic times when maybe you do that exact kind of thing, hoping your opponent thinks it's a mistake if you have it all planned out. But in general, you want to be confident when you move the pieces. You know, you want to pick up a piece and move it to the square that it should be on and leave it there. And you want it to seem like you meant to make that move and that you're confident that that move's a good move. And you want to be, you want your opponent to think you're sure of yourself. And if you do that, you'll be more sure of yourself. If you're always hovering and picking up a piece and wondering what square, you're going to make a mistake. And I see so many kids, they pick up a piece and then they look at all the squares that piece could go with their hand, and then they finally put it somewhere. That's not the best way to look. What you should always do is you should always think about all your options, even if your piece is under attack. You know, even if they push this pawn and this pawn can take our bishop now, we should be thinking about all of our options first, seeing what exactly we want to do with this bishop, and in our heads, before we even touch the bishop, know where we're going to go. If we're going to take the bishop, we take the bishop. If we're going to retreat the bishop, we retreat the bishop. But what we don't do is we don't pick up the bishop and then start thinking about what we want to do with it. It's almost sure we're going to make the wrong move, and our opponent knows we're not sure what we're going to do, and there's no good that can come from that. So we want to make sure when we make our moves, we're confident and we're sure of ourselves. To go along with that, I like to move the pieces nicely. And one thing you could do in your chess career is work on early moving the pieces. You know, moving them like an ogre where you grab the piece and like put it down like that and then let it go. That's not what you want to do. When you see good chess players, you should know just by the way they move their pieces. You know, it should look effortlessly and like the pieces are just kind of floating around the chessboard when you move. And, you know, they should go to the middle of their squares and they should be quick with their moves and stuff like that. You know, your pieces should move quickly, and so we should make sure we kind of work on that. So a few things I always do. For one, when you start to set up your board, always put your pieces right in the middle of the squares and adjust them. And then when you move a piece, try to move it confidently and move it right to the middle of the square. You know, you don't want to adjust it too much, so you want to put it there. And then when I capture, I do it a few different ways. There's a few ways to capture. Doing this, you know, and knocking it off the chessboard is not the way to do it. Either I pick up the piece and I put my piece there, which I think is a good way to go, or you can also work on exchanging them where you put it like this in your hand and you take it off the board that way. And that's a good way to go too. You can kind of see it just kind of rolls out of your hand when you do it. And that's a good thing to get good at too. That way when you take the piece, it looks like you meant to do it and you were confident. You know, you can kind of do it with all the pawns like this. And when you take bigger pieces, same things, like the knight's here, you can take it like that, or you can take it like this. Anyway, when you move, you make it look like you meant to do it. That gives you a little bit of a psychological edge. Okay, so whenever we move a piece or capture a piece, kind of work on, you know, doing it with some finesse. We're doing it, but we want to look good while we're doing it. That's always important. Okay. Other things is, of course, we've got to be careful that, like we said, we're not going to touch a piece first and then move it. Because in tournaments, we'll be touch move, which means if we touch this piece, we already are forced to move it. If we move the pawn and then we touch this piece, we're already forced to move it. And if there's no good squares, too bad for us, we have to move it. Don't forget, if you touch your opponent's piece, you have to take it. You're forced to take it. So don't touch your opponent's piece unless you're sure you want to take it too. So things like that are important. If we're thinking before, we know exactly we're going to move our piece when we touch it. Who cares if we touch it? We already know right where it's going, right? Right to the square we want it. This would be the start of our Gilko piano, right? So make our moves right where we want to. Also, something that you'll be told if you don't know, when you're moving with the clock, every time you make a move, you make your move and hit the clock with the same hand. You never move with one hand and then hit the clock with the other hand. You always move with the same hand. So if I move over here, hit the clock, my opponent should move with the same hand and then hit the clock. If I move, I make a move, hit the clock. So anytime I move, I always move with the same hand. One hand does all the work in chess. You don't need two hands to play chess. It's one of the great things about it. Okay, so another thing that's important for practical advice, and that is good to know, is play the chessboard, don't play your opponent. So many people want to play their opponent. They maybe make a move, and then like looking up their opponent each move, like, what does he think of my move? Maybe he thinks it's a bad move. Maybe he thinks it's a good move. You don't want to do that. You want to play the best move that you see on the chessboard, seeing all of the combinations that you see and all of the things that you've practiced, and you don't want to play your opponent. Don't play different because your opponent's aggressive. Don't play different because you think your opponent's worse than you. Don't make cheap threats or something like that. We talked about like the scholars made early in the year. Just because you think your opponent's a bad opponent, don't make worse moves. This is a cheap trick where you try to checkmate your opponent in 4 moves. And we talked about the way to stop it. Now if your opponent stops it, maybe he's learned the scholars made even though he's not a good player, now you're in a worse position to start off. Now maybe something goes south and you lose your queen and you're in a terrible position. So always play the chessboard. You should always be trying to play the best moves. On top of that, that's what helps you improve the most. If you're always trying to play your opponent, play different based on your opponent, you're doing worse. We had this cute kid in chess camp. I remember he was 7 or 8. He had this British accent, and he used to tell us the funniest thing. And I remember he used to go to us. He used to be like, well, I could have taken my opponent's queen, but I thought that down the road, late into the future, that poor things would happen to me, and later on it would come back to hurt me. So I decided not to take my opponent's queen for free. And I remember we used to work on it and work on it. We could never help this kid. He had it in his mind that his opponent was always setting a trap for him, and even if there was a free queen sitting there that you could take, he was not going to take it because he's worried about what his opponent was going to do. Even if you feel like there might be a trap coming, if you don't see the trap, you should still play the move that you're thinking of. You should only play the best moves that you see, and you shouldn't, you know, if your opponent's a good opponent and you see a move and you're like, no, he must have seen that coming, I can't make that move. Don't do that. Check all your moves, think as much as you can, and then make the best move you see on the board. Always play the board, not the opponent. Never avoid moves that you think might be good because you think your opponent might have thought ahead, and just always make sure you're thinking of the opponent. Now, as you get later on, and you've played for a long, long time, you may prepare against your opponent a certain opening that you think would be dangerous against their style, or a certain style that you may think may be tough for your opponent to play. But that's not saying that we're not looking at the board and playing the exact best moves, and we certainly shouldn't be scared of our opponents and play different because of that, and we certainly shouldn't be trying cheap tricks on our opponent because our opponents aren't good. You're going to have the most success and improve the most if you always play the best move you see on the board. And it's amazing how much you see. You know, people will play me and they'll be scared of me and they won't play good moves, or I'll see them play somebody who's a little bit older than them. Maybe it's a student that's playing a kid a couple of grades older, and even though their rating is higher and I know they're better, they won't play well because they're playing somebody older, or they're playing, somebody who they think they can beat, and all of a sudden they won't play well. You should just focus on the board, and that will get all your focus on the board too. And that brings me to my next point, which is focus on the board as much as you can. If you're focusing on your opponent, if you're focusing on he's going to beat me, he's better than me, or I need to beat him, or it's going to look really bad because he's worse than me, if you're focusing on anything other than the board, you're wasting your time and it's distracting you. You need to focus on the board. The chess game is won and lost on the board. Chess players used to always call me overrated, which was the most insulting thing and very disappointing. And as a kid, it really hurt my feelings because they would be saying that even though I've earned these rating points, and it's a number that showed how good I wasn't really that good because it seemed like I was always losing to people worse than me. But the deal was, I would be able to beat people better than me because I was working really hard at the board. So even though they had better strategies than me, and they might have been more skilled in the essentials of chess, because I worked harder at the board, I was able to beat them. Because chess is all about, one big mistake changes the whole game. They might have made 10 of 15 of the first moves better than me, but one big mistake completely changes and flips the game around. So just remember that. Chess is all about working hard the whole time. If you're setting up all these great strategies and stuff and you make one big mistake, it ruins everything. So much of it is just staying focused, not getting distracted, and working hard at the chessboard. I tell kids, don't look up at the lights during your